Alrighty, here we go. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another DxO webinar. It is so fabulous to see you this morning. I'm your host, Photo Joseph, and I am getting to show you something brand new today, which is always super fun for me. We have a brand new product here to show off called DxO PureRAW. Now, let's see, here's the topics we're going to cover today. Really, I'm not going to read all this. This is basically going to be an introduction to the app, and I'm going to show you not only what it does, but how this fits into your workflow. That's the summary of what we're doing today. So with that said, before I start doing an actual demo, let me just talk to you guys for a little bit and explain what this app is and its purpose and how it would fit into what you're already doing. So first off, the most common question that I've gotten on this app right now is, if I already have Photolab 4, do I need DxO PureRAW? The simple answer is no. What PureRAW is already built into Photolab 4. This is essentially a piece of Photolab 4 extracted out as a standalone app. So the two pieces that is the raw decoding engine, which includes access to all of the custom DxO profiles. These are the profiles that are made for every camera and lens combination. There are over 60,000 possible profiles that can be downloaded depending on your camera and lens combinations that you're shooting with. So you're getting access to all of that, plus you're getting the deep prime noise reduction, as well as the original prime, but of course the deep prime is what we're really interested in. And so essentially what you're getting with PureRAW is a standalone raw decoder that is taking the whole raw engine out of Photolab. So this is for users who don't want to use Photolab, who aren't interested in changing their workflow to use the Photolab app, but do want to have access to the superior raw processing, lens correction, distortion correction, noise removal, chromatic aberration removal, and all the beautiful things that come along with the raw engine out of Photolab. So it operates as a standalone app. And throughout today's presentation, I'm going to show you how the app works, but more importantly, I'm going to be showing you how this integrates into existing workflows. And this is a really important part of this. DxO understands that the whole purpose of this product is to be injected into an existing workflow. And that's a big ask, right? It's one thing to ask people to say, hey, abandon whatever product you're using and come switch over to our product. That's almost a little bit easier to understand. We have something that is different and we think is better. Come use this instead. But what we're doing now is saying, hey, we've got a little extra piece that you can inject into your workflow. We're not actually asking you to change your workflow. We're just asking you to add something else into it. And in some cases, only when you want to. And that, of course, is totally up to you. So whether your workflow means that you just store your photos in the Finder or in Windows Explorer, and all you do is take an occasional raw photo, open it in Photoshop or Capture One or Affinity Photo or Apple Photos or whatever you like. You store your photos in folders, but you just want to take the occasional photo, open it up and work on it. We got you covered. What we can do is take over the raw processing and then hand it off to the other app as a new DNG file. And I'm going to come back to this in a moment because the fact that it's DNG is super, super important. If you are, however, using a workflow or you're in a workflow where you already have an asset management tool, let's say you're using Capture One to store and organize your photos, or you're using Lightroom Classic, any asset management tool, we can now say, hey, for those occasional photos that you really want to get the most out of, maybe it's a photo that's a really high ISO, or maybe it's a photo that's got really bad chromatic aberration, or maybe it's just a photo that already looks great, but you're going, you know, this is a really special photo. I want to see if I can get even more out of this. I want the absolute most out of this picture. Then we can take over for just a moment and say, hey, give us your photo. We're going to give you back something even better. That's the idea behind that workflow. And we can even do that if you're using a cloud-based workflow. If you're using Apple Photos or Lightroom CC, we can still inject into that workflow when and where you want it. So that's kind of the high level summary of what it is and how it works. Now, there's one other important thing that I glossed over that I want to hit on again, and that is the fact that it is, what you're getting out of this is a DNG file. DNG is Adobe's digital negative format, and DNG is RAW. Now, this is super, super important. What you're used to with Photolab is you would bring in a RAW photo, and you could do all kinds of RAW processing in there, and you could do, your exposure adjustments and so on. But once you sent it off to a plugin, let's say you sent it off to a NIT collection plugin, or you opened it in some other app, generally what happens is the photo is processed as a TIFF file. And it could be a 16-bit TIFF file, but it's processed as a TIFF file and sent off. What we're doing with PureRAW instead, and you can actually do this in Photolab as well, but what we're doing with PureRAW instead is we are outputting a DNG, and a DNG is still a RAW file. So what this means is that you're getting a new RAW file that has the lens correction, distortion correction, chromatic aberration removal, all the good stuff you get from the DxO Optics profiles processed and applied to your photo. You get the really high-end noise reduction, so deep prime noise reduction applied to your photo. But what you don't have applied, and this is a really, really important part of it, what you don't have applied is DxO's color correction, their color profiles, the color adjustment, color science, color treatment, whatever you want to call it. That color work is what makes individual RAW decoders what they are. I mean, it's a big part of it, right? So this is why, for example, Capture One users, for the most part, love Capture One, is because they love the look of their RAW photos in there. The most Capture One, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of Capture One photographers are portrait photographers. They love, love, love the way that their RAW photos, their portraits, are treated in Capture One. They just love the colors that come out of it. A lot of people love Adobe's color processing, how the colors look coming out of Adobe apps. A lot of people love the Apple color processing and how the colors are coming out of the Apple apps. We're not taking any of that away. We're not changing any of that. Because the DNG does not have a color profile applied to it, whatever app you always use is able to apply its color profiling to it. So you're not changing the colors of your photo. If you love Capture One colors, you still get Capture One colors. It's just that you're getting them applied to a better version of the RAW file than you started with. So that's how that works. That's the difference there. Super, super important to understand that. So I've got a question that started to come up. Let me take a look at this, and then we're going to get into the first part of the demo here. Turn my phone on Do Not Disturb here. All right, first question is, if I produce a DNG file with PureRAW and load it into Lightroom or Capture One, how do the controls for sharpness, etc., have to be in Lightroom and in Capture One? The default position of Capture One is between 130 and 180. Do I have to turn it to 0? Okay, that is a great question. I'm really glad that you asked that, because I might have forgotten to cover that later on. If any camera profile corrections are applied, or sharpness, post-processing sharpness, post-RAW sharpness are applied, those generally do want to be removed. If you don't remove them, then you are going to be doubling them up. Now, you'll see in today's demo, and the reason I say I'm glad you asked, because I might have forgotten, is I'm not going to actually have to remove it anywhere. And in fact, in one instance, you'll see that the software automatically removes some post-processing sharpening, which I found quite interesting. I'm still learning part of how the other apps, third-party apps, are interacting with the PureRAW files, which has been a very interesting learning experience in itself. But I've never come across a situation where I had to manually do that. However, I don't have Capture One. I actually tried to install it, and my so-called perpetual license expired apparently, so I have to figure that out. So I don't have Capture One loaded up to look at that. But if there is, for any reason, any post-sharpening or lens corrections applied, you will want to remove it. If you don't, what'll happen is it'll be doubling it up. The sharpening won't look right, and especially lens corrections will overcorrect, and so you'll end up with a double corrected image, and so that's not going to look right either. I think it would be pretty obvious once you hit an image that something was wrong, and that's what you would be looking for. But again, so far I've never actually had to manually remove it, which is kind of interesting. So thanks for the question. It's an awesome question. I'm really glad you asked that. Okay, let's do this. All right, I'm going to switch over to where I guess I should probably launch PureRAW. That'd be a great start. I'd quit it so that I could get rid of all of the custom profiles. All right, I'm going to turn off my camera for now so that we make a little bit more room on the screen. I will turn my camera back on when we come back for the Q's and A's. All right, this is PureRAW. It's pretty simple, not a whole lot to look at here. You have a big empty interface that says add photos to process. You can click to add them or just drag and drop them in, and a couple little buttons up here that we'll go through. But this is it. There's not a whole lot to look at. So the process that I'm going to start with is starting with some photos that are in the Finder. So this is the example where I've got a bunch of photos that I'm just storing in folders in the Finder or Windows Explorer, of course, and I'm just going to drag and drop these in. And as soon as I drop them in, you get this thing that pops up that says, hey, you need to download the DxO Optics modules. Now remember, there is a unique optics module. Again, this is the same as in Photolab 4. You have a unique optics module for each one of the camera and lens combinations. So this is a Canon 1DS Mark III with a 15mm fisheye. This is a GH5 with a 50-200 lens. Here's a 5D Mark II with a 50mm 1.2 lens. So 4 different photos, 3 different optics modules. I click download and boom, 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 they're downloaded super fast and easy. And important to know that once you download these, you will never have to download them again. This is a one-shot deal, unless of course you go and manually delete them. All right, so now I've got these 4 photos in here. These are all ready to be processed. I'm going to start with this photo here of the Great Wall of China. I'm going to click on Process Photos, and here's the only choices dialog, the only options dialog that you'll ever see, other than when you export it and where you want to send it next. But as far as processing, this is it. And you don't have a lot to choose from, and honestly, you're probably never going to change a single one of these. But let me just show you what there is. So first of all, you have raw processing, which really is about denoising. I can choose to do the high quality denoising, which is just your standard basic denoising that's part of the algorithm. I can do prime denoising, which is the denoising that we have all come to know and love from using Photolab for years and years. And then there's deep prime, the latest iteration of denoising, which is the better, deeper, more advanced algorithm. So clearly, we're going to leave it to there. Output format. You can choose between DNG and JPEG. Now, there's really only one good reason you'd ever use JPEGs, and that is if you just needed to quickly output a bunch of full resolution JPEGs and send them somewhere. Other than that, forget about it. You want DNG. DNG, of course, is that raw file. Again, not a TIFF. It is a DNG, so it's still raw. And then there's the destination. Where are these going to go? By default, they'll go into a folder called DxO in the same folder as the original photos. If you want, you can give a custom location, but we're just going to leave everything at the default and click process. Now, it does have deep prime applied to it, which for those of you who have used deep prime, you know that it can take a while to process, except that I'm on this crazy ripping Mac Pro machine that tears right through it, and in a matter of seconds, we've got our done photo here. So now I'm ready to send this off to another app. I can actually do a couple things. I can just go to the Finder, and then that'll just show me the picture in the Finder. I can view the results here in PureRAW. I'm not going to do that now. We'll come back to that later. Or I can choose to export. And then from export, where am I going to export them to? In this case, I want to export the photo off to Photoshop. You'll see here I also have an option to export the original raw file, which doesn't really make sense for Photoshop. It will make sense when we get into the asset management tools. But for now, we're going to choose Photoshop and just click export. This is going to open in Photoshop. However, Photoshop, of course, is going to first send it off to ACR, Adobe Camera Raw. This is part of how Photoshop works with raw files. It doesn't process them directly. It leaves that up to ACR. Okay, so here is the DNG file in ACR. If I want to make raw type changes to it, you can see here, there's DNG. If I want to make raw type changes to it, like changing the color temperature, I can do that. Keeping in mind, we are looking at the base raw file here. So I have all the same adjustments I would have for any other raw photo right here in Camera Raw. Now at this point, let's say that I'm done with my raw processing. I want to send this off to Photoshop to work on. Down here in the bottom right, I have the open button. If I click open, then as you are undoubtedly aware, ACR, Adobe Camera Raw, is going to render out pixels and send those pixels to Photoshop, which is fine. But the whole reason for me to ever go to Photoshop is ultimate flexibility. And so for me, that means opening a raw file as an object. That opens it as a smart object, which means I'll be able to go back into ACR at any time. It also means that when I apply a filter like a Nik collection filter here, we're going to apply the SilverFX Pro Nik collection filter to this. It means that when I apply this, I'll be able to go back into the Nik collection and re-edit that at any time. So let me just kind of go through this process. We've got, pardon me, we've got enough time here. I want to go through this. So let's just say I've just applied a preset here. Okay, I'm going to hit OK on that. And once that renders out, I look at this and I go, okay, next thing I want to do is change the exposure, the base exposure of the photo. You know, the sky's a bit blown out, the foreground, it maybe is a little dark, I don't know, but the sky's definitely blown out. I want to fix this, but I don't want to fix it here in Photoshop affecting the pixels on top, I want to go underneath the blanket, if you will. I want to go into the raw processing by double clicking on this and taking me back into ACR, back into camera raw. Now I can make changes as I had before. See, the changes I made before, they're still here, right? This is ACR. These changes are still here. So now let's do something like a let's do exposure gradients. Let's do it this way. Went the wrong direction there. Let's do a exposure gradient across the top here. Maybe I'll make this a little bit darker. Let's really bring that sky down a little bit. Put another gradient across the bottom here. Let's do this one going the other way. We'll brighten that up a little bit. And I can totally alter the exposure of the file, but at the raw level. So this is, again, this is ACR. We're doing this just as we would if this was the first time we were here, except we've already been to Photoshop and now we've round tripped back. So I'll click OK. That's going to re-render that. And we'll see the reprocessed version of this in just a moment here. And of course, this is, there we go, this is still a smart object, and it still has a smart filter on it, which means I can double click on the smart filter, go back into this, here we go, back into SilverFX Pro, and now I can do something else. I can go in and let's change up the structure on this. Let's just really crank up the structure on this photo in here. I can do my selective adjustments, whatever I want to do in here. Maybe I want to darken the sky just a little bit here. Let's take this and darken that just a touch in there. That part of it, cool, cool, cool. So now I've got this really awesome image that has been round tripped back and forth multiple times, but is still pardon me, is still original raw data. We have not converted anything to pixels yet. So that's one workflow. That is a super, super flexible workflow, super powerful workflow. It really gives you a lot of flexibility in how you handle your photos. And for me, this is kind of the ultimate in flexibility in the workflows here. So there's a couple of questions that popped up. Let me take a look at these, and then we will go back through, go back into the app. Pardon me, sorry about this. Okay, question. If PureRAW is in fact a component of Photolab 4, are you then able to open Photolab 4, take advantage of only the PureRAW component, and send the adjusted image directly to Lightroom or Photoshop? You can. In fact, if you watch the last webinar that I did exactly that. I opened a photo in PureRAW, and then I exported a DNG, and in the DNG settings, there is a choice to choose to add or not add DxO's color profile to it. By not adding DxO's color profile, you are effectively getting exactly this. You are getting that raw file that has had the lens corrections applied, has the deep prime denoising applied. Sorry about this, guys. And does not have any color profiling applied. So that is all totally there. So in this case, if you already, and people ask me all the time, okay, I've already got Photolab, do I need to buy PureRAW? You don't need it. You already have everything. The only reason that you might want to buy it anyway is because of the convenience of the workflow. It is faster, it's an easier workflow to add your photos here, process them and send them back out again, and you'll see some of the additional things that we get into. There's some convenience to it, but it is convenience. I want to make that clear. It is convenience. This is not adding any capabilities to it. So that said, thank you for the question. It's a great question. What model of Mac Pro am I using? A big one, a 16 core. It's a big machine. I do a lot of really high-end video work, so it's justified. It's a little overkill for this, but it works. It's the 2019. I don't remember what all the specs are, but it's awesome. Okay, thank you for those questions. Okay, I guess maybe people just want to see just for reference here. Let's just pull up the About My Mac. So it's a 16 core, 3.2 gigahertz, 192 gigs of RAM, and the Radeon Pro 16 gig W5700X card. There you go. Okay. All right, so now let's move on to another workflow. Turn off my camera. Let's close this picture, and I'll go back over to PureRAW. Okay, next workflow that I want to talk about is a workflow where, let's say that I want to process all of my photos through PureRAW before sending them off to an asset management tool. So I've got a couple photos selected. Obviously, in real world, you would do more. I'm just going to do 2 in here. You select your settings, again, leaving everything at the default, click on process, it's going to tear through these, and then I'm going to send these to Lightroom Classic. So that's going to be my next workflow. So again, to reiterate, this workflow is the user who is wants to use an asset management tool, doesn't want to use Photolab, wants to process every photo, or at least the majority of their photos, in PureRAW before getting into the other app. So that's kind of what this workflow is. So I got my processing done dialog. This time I will view the results in PureRAW, and this will allow me to see the results of these. So here, this photo was shot with a fisheye lens. Here's the corrected element of that. You can actually turn off the lens correction. So if you only wanted to use deep prime denoising, so let's say you have a high ISO file that was shot with a fisheye, but you want it to look like a fisheye, then we can do that. I'll show you how to do that in a moment. But you can see here that this has been applied. So there's our before and after. And then here's another before and after. And this photo is a really high ISO micro four thirds photo. And so this is the beauty one to really show the difference. You're seeing just how dramatic the effect is in here. Now, in this example, on the left-hand side, what we're looking at is the raw file without any denoising applied to it. Now, this is perhaps a little bit misleading in the sense that you would never actually see the photo looking like this in any raw processing app. If you open this photo in Lightroom or Capture One or anywhere, any raw decoder, you're not going to see it quite this badly, because every raw decoder applies some level of base denoising to it. Here we're seeing it without any of that base denoising. This is kind of showing you the raw, absolute, utter raw file without anything applied to it. On the right-hand side, we're seeing the PureRAW processed file. So this has the deep prime denoising applied to it. What we're going to do in a moment here is take this into Lightroom, and we're going to compare what we can do with the original raw file in Lightroom versus what we're getting out of PureRAW. But I just wanted to make it clear that what you're looking at here on the left, while it looks absolutely awful, it kind of looks worse than you would normally see it in any other raw processing tool. Okay, so that said, now let's go ahead and take these two photos and send these off to Lightroom. So they're both still selected. I'll go export to, I'm going to choose Lightroom Classic, and I'm also going to choose to export the original files this time. I want to take the originals with it so I can compare. Click on export, and all this is doing now is opening up the import dialog inside of Lightroom Classic. This is not a plugin. It's not some special round tripping technique. It is simply triggering the import dialog with those images selected. So there's the two DNGs. You can see the DNG name on there and the two original RAWs. So at this point, I could actually add more to these selections if I wanted to. All right, I click on import. It'll add these to the database. And in just a moment, we see all four of those images. All right, now let's take a look at the PureRAW. Let's start with that one. There's the PureRAW processed version of this photo versus the straight raw. This is the .rw2 file that came out of the camera processed by Lightroom. So you can see here it does not look as bad as it did before, right? The color noise is largely gone, but very obviously we still have a huge amount of noise in here. Okay, so let's see what kind of denoising I can do here in Lightroom. I'm going to switch over to the develop module, and I'm going to do a split screen here. And on the left-hand side, I'm going to show the PureRAW version. So on the left, PureRAW, on the right, the original RAW. Again, in Lightroom, we do have noise reduction, additional noise reduction. So let's just see how good it is. So here's my noise reduction slider. You see it set to 0. There's some color denoising already applied. In fact, I've never tried this. Yeah, if I take the color denoising down all the way, there we pretty much see where we started in PureRAW. But you know, that's kind of unfair because you would never see it like that. So now let's go ahead and add some luminance noise reduction. The way I'm going to do this is my objective is to get this image on the right to look like the one on the left. I want to see if I can do it. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to look at the grain pattern in this flat area of the photo. So the back of this woman's head, the back of her scarf, we've got highlights, we've got shadows, and so it's really easy to see the grain in there. I'm going to see the same thing over here, the noise rather. Let's go ahead and take that luminance slider up, and I'm going to keep dragging this up until I feel that the noise levels are the same. And I would say right about there. So I can go too far, right? And it just turns into a big mush. But let's be fair. Let's get it right about the same. I'm going to say that's pretty good. Okay, so there is my equivalent amount of denoising done. Now, we can already see there's a massive difference between these two, but we do have other sliders. So the fact that we've lost color and contrast in here, let's give Lightroom a fair shake. Let's take my detail slider and I'll crank it up a little bit. Yeah, pretty good. And then I'll take the contrast and drag that up a bit. And you know, we're getting better, right? This is definitely better. Adding the contrast back in really helps a lot, but it is still a far cry. Now this photo right here, side by side, you can see there's a pretty big difference, but let me show you a couple other parts of the picture. Let's go down to this fellow here. Look at the back of his head. Look at the color and the texture in his hair on the left versus on the right. Look at this guy's scarf. The colors, again, the texture on the left versus on the right. There's almost no colors, but almost completely extracted. It's soft, it's mushy, it just looks terrible. Now let's take a look. This is one of my favorite parts. Take a look at this part of the photo. The back of this fellow is just dark. The back of her, it's dark, pure black. And it is pure black here on the left. But on the right, we've got this grain pattern, this mush, it's kind of greenish gray. And there's even, you might be able to see it through the screen share, there's like a stripes pattern that has shown up. There's some anomaly, some kind of a pattern that has emerged from the raw processing over here on the right that is simply not happening on the left. Look at her face down here. I mean, just night and day difference in here. So this is where PureRAW really, really shines. We have this incredible ability to do an absolutely epic amount of noise reduction to any photo that you want to process, but still lets you process this the way that you normally would as far as color correction and everything else using whatever your normal tools are. Okay, so this process that I just went through, the idea of this workflow was, I'm the photographer who wants to take all of my photos, pass them through PureRAW, and then send those off to Lightroom or wherever. Probably not that realistic, because I think most users are going to just want to handle individual files from PureRAW, from Lightroom or wherever into PureRAW. So let's look at that next. My next workflow is I am working in Lightroom or Capture One or any asset management tool out there, and I just want to take an occasional photo and send that off to PureRAW. Okay, so that's next. All right, let me set this up, and let's turn off the split screen and go back to the library view here, and I'm going to go to a different photo folder. All right, over here on the left, you'll see I have this collection of photos called Winter to Spring. So I have a bunch of pretty pictures in here. These are all just normal raw files. See, RW2s, these are normal raw files in here. These are not DNGs that have been processed by PureRAW yet. And in this case, I'm going to open, actually, I'm going to do a different photo this time. I'm going to do this one here. I'm going to open this photo here, which has beautiful structure to it. I mean, drops of water in here are super crisp and sharp, looks really pretty. This is shot at relatively low ISO. Where's my, oh yeah, 200 ISO. Okay, so very low ISO. So it's very low ISO. We are still seeing some noise showing up in the background in here, which I think, to be fair, would probably be easy to get rid of inside of Lightroom, but there is a little bit of noise back there. But what I want to see is if I can get any more sharpness out of this photo. This photo has these beautiful water droplets on it. It's already very sharp, but maybe I can get a little bit more out of it. So this is the photo that I want to process. Now, there's a couple different ways we can go about this. No matter what asset management tool you're using, if you right click on the photo, you're going to find some type of a command like show in Finder, reveal original, something along these lines that is going to allow you to find the original photo in the Finder. And this is, or Windows Explorer, of course. And this is a really important part of this workflow. If I'm working with a local asset management tool, not a cloud-based one, I'm working with a local asset management tool. That means that my original photos are somewhere on my computer. I might know exactly where they are because I'm really good at organizing them. I might not because I'm just letting the software do whatever. They're somewhere on your system. You need to find that photo in your system and drag that into PureRAW. That's the process. We don't have to use a plugin for this. It's just drag and drop. So how am I going to find that? Well, again, right click and reveal in Finder, show original, whatever the command happens to be, it's going to be there. So you find that, and that's going to allow you to reveal it. So here in Lightroom, I can right click on this photo and choose show in Finder, and that's going to open up a Finder window, and there it is. There's that original picture. So now from here, I can simply go to PureRAW, and let's actually make this window a little bit smaller here, make this a little more manageable. So I can go to PureRAW, take that, great. Go back, there it is, take that and drag and drop it in. So that would be an option, perfectly viable way to do it. If you're on Lightroom for Mac, and this is apparently, unfortunately I've been told this is a unique Mac feature, but if you're on Lightroom for Mac, there's a really cool capability here. I'm going to grab this photo here, a little picture of these purple flowers, and while I'm clicking and dragging, I'm in Lightroom, clicking and dragging, while I'm holding down, I'm going to Command Tab over to PureRAW, and then drop it in PureRAW. And look at this, it actually exports the raw file. Again, this appears to be a Mac only feature. Sorry as Windows users, but that's just how it is. And it's just kind of a neat little shortcut in here. Okay, so that pops up. I get my optics module. This is shot on a G9 with a 200mm lens. Awesome. I'll click download. It downloads that required profile, hit save. And again, I will never have to download that again, and then process that photo. I'm going to leave everything at the default. We'll hit the process button on this and let it tear through. And then we're going to take a look at this in, well, we're going to look at the split screen here in PureRAW. Let's do a side by side and see what we've got out of it. And then we will take this over to Lightroom. Okay, so let's view the results. And let's go back to nice and big on here. And let me go to 1:1 on this. And well, I mean, let me put the split right down the middle of the flower here. First of all, let's take a look at the background. You can see on the left is the original, on the right is the new one. So a little bit of noise, not a lot, a little bit, but like no noise on the right here. But look at the drops of water on the flower, how much sharper, how much crisper they are. It is just beautiful. It's a really tremendous difference in there. So that's a really great result. Okay, awesome. I know that I want to send this photo off to Lightroom. So that photo is still selected. I can right click on it and choose export to application, variety of ways to get there. We're going to send this to Lightroom Classic. I'm not going to choose export original because the original is already there. Click on export. What this does is it opens up once again the import dialog, and I'll just click on import to bring this in. And now here's kind of a neat little thing. You might have come across, you might have been in a situation where you add photos back into Lightroom, and now you've got to figure out where your originals were and drag them in so they're all side by side. I'm not gonna have to do that because, okay, there's that original winter to spring folder. Look underneath it, there's a new folder, DxO, because remember that's how this works. We let the software create a DxO folder inside of the original. And because I have this option here enabled, show photos in subfolders, when I click on this folder, it's going to show me everything inside the subfolders as well, which means I'm now going to see my two photos side by side, or ever so slightly not side by side because my thumbnails are too small. There we go. So I see these two photos side by side. All right, well, let's take a look at what these actually look like in here. There is the processed photo, and there is the original raw, back and forth in here. Now, here's something really, really interesting. And I will admit, even further interesting to me because I haven't done this photo before and something unique has just happened. But the first thing I want to point out is the color adjustments have already been applied in here. Notice that, right? Let's look at the develop module. Look at this photo. This is the DNG. You can always check down here at the bottom, DNG. And this already has a little tone curve applied to it, a little clarity, saturation applied to it, a highlight reduction, contrast increase. All this is already applied to the photo. Well, hold on a second. I didn't do anything to the photo. Go back to the original one here, and all those adjustments are still applied in there. Well, what happened? Well, it turns out that when you go through this process of dragging the file over, the XMP data goes with it, and so the DNG file knows what adjustments were previously applied and reapplies them. You can still reset it. You can start over from scratch if you want to, but those adjustments are already applied. Now, I said this one, it surprised me a little bit because previously when I've demoed this, the crop did not get carried over with it. For some reason, this time the crop did get carried with it. Go Adobe. I have no idea what's happened there. But regardless, let's just say that none of these adjustments had been applied. Maybe that the workflow you did, it doesn't automatically bring over the adjustments. Easy enough to fix. Choose the original image. I'll hit Command C to copy. That brings up the copy settings. You'll see all the different things that I can choose in here. Now, here's a great example of that lens correction that was asked in the beginning. If I had applied lens corrections to the original photo, I would want to turn that off now. I think by default, when you do a copy settings, that gets disabled because you might be pasting these onto a photo done with a different camera, and so you wouldn't want those. So by default, I think that gets turned off, but it's something to watch out for. Make sure you don't apply that on there. And then I would hit copy and then go to the new one and paste, but again, this is already done for me. So now let's do a side-by-side. Let's take a look at these here in Lightroom side-by-side, and let's get this up here. So we've got the, make sure I got the right ones. Yep, okay, so we got the right ones on the left and the right here. Now we're seeing the difference in here. Let me try and find the exact same spot of the photo. I think, is that right? No, that's not right. Where's the right spot of the photo? There we go. Now we're comparing them side by side. I'll let the screen redraw, and you can see, I mean, this is a really, really clear difference in here. The background is completely free of noise on the left. The droplets of water stand out more. They're just really popping off the screen. It's just a tremendous difference in there. So there's the advantage of even working with a non-high ISO file of processing it through PureRAW. And of course, in this case, we did a workflow where we started with an asset management tool where I got to be able to drag and drop it. But if you don't have that option, then just right click and reveal the original. Okay, I've got a couple other workflows I want to go through. Let's see, how are we on time? We're doing great. Let me take a look at the questions in here and see what comes up. Okay, what is the increase of the raw size in the treatment? That's a great question. DNG files are bigger. They are, I think, 3 to 4 times the size of the original raw file. That's just DNG. That has nothing to do with pure raw. That is how DNG works. So yeah, so they're big. They are big. So for that reason, it's most likely that you're not going to handle all of your files, process all of your files through it. You've got the option, but I think most users aren't going to want to do that, which I kind of said in the beginning. I think most users are going to want to do individuals, but thank you for asking that. It's a good question. Second question, when you exported from SilverFX Pro to Photoshop, why did it show up in ADC as a color image again? Okay, awesome. So first of all, I did not export from SilverFX Pro. SilverFX Pro was acting as a plugin, as a filter in Photoshop. So I was in Photoshop, I opened the SilverFX Pro plugin, did my work, and went back to Photoshop. Now, if I was not working with smart objects, if from ACR I had clicked open instead of open as object, then what would be sent to Photoshop would be pixels, and then the SilverFX Pro filter would have permanently altered those pixels. However, since I chose to go from ACR to Photoshop as a smart object, it is basically a container. Think of it like this. You've got a file within a file. I have a raw file, raw DNG, that is sitting in Photoshop as a layer. I can open that raw DNG and get to its contents. By getting to its contents, I have access to all the original data, and I'm not actually making any changes to the pixels. The smart filter, because I applied SilverFX Pro, which is I should say smart filter capable. If you are applying that filter to a smart object, which I was, then the filter operates as a smart filter, which means that it applies the adjustments as a metadata layer on top of the original photo. So you see the black and white conversion, but it is not permanent, which is why I can go back into the filter and I can make any changes that I want. I can undo, I can change any slider that I want to, and I'm not reprocessing the image, I'm just changing the metadata. Think of it like if you were in Lightroom or in PhotoLab and you're working on a raw file and you can take your exposure all the way up and then you can take it all the way down, all the way up, all the way down, all the way up, all the way down. And you're not increasing the exposure permanently and then decreasing it permanently, which would result in a big old mush of image that would look horrible. Instead, you are changing the metadata. You are saying every time you move a slider in Lightroom or in PhotoLab, you are not altering the pixels, you're altering the instructions. You are saying, translate this at +1 exposure. Okay, now translate it at -1 exposure. Don't add +1, process that, and then take away 2. No, just restart from the beginning at -1. So that's what's happening here with the smart objects. So to go all the way back to the color object, I've got effectively, think of it like metadata layers. I have, let's start at the bottom. I've got my raw photo. On top of that, I have the raw processing instructions, just instructions. On top of that, I've got my SilverFX Pro instructions. And whenever I look at the file, I'm looking at the instructions to convert it to black and white and the instructions to do the raw processing back down to the base layer. I can go down to the base layer, make any changes to that color image, and the instructions get reapplied until I get to the final result that I see on top. So hopefully that explains it. It's maybe a bit long-winded, but hopefully that helps to kind of dive deeper into what's happening. You have the ultimate flexibility that way, and you're never altering a single pixel, which is super, super powerful. So great question. Thank you very much. Last question is up right now. Will this program work with JPEG iPhone files? It will not work with JPEGs at all. The whole point of PureRAW is to work with a raw file. It has to be a raw file. You cannot give it a JPEG. You also cannot give it a raw file that was shot with a unknown lens. So if you're shooting with, I don't have one here, but if you're shooting with old mechanical vintage lenses, for example, adapted lenses, this doesn't work because the whole premise of the DxO optics modules is that there is a module, a little piece of software, a little instruction set, if you will, that has been created for every camera and lens combination. And for that to work, the software has to know what that camera and lens was. If you're shooting on, the latest Canon, whatever camera, but you've got an old lens that's adapted in manual and adapted over, when you look at that photo in any app, Photoshop, Lightroom, Capture One, whatever, you'll see the model of the camera, but for the lens, it'll say unknown, or it'll just be blank. You have to have both of those pieces of metadata. So this only works with raw files, and only with raw files that are processed, that are shot with camera and lens where the metadata is there. Which is to say, basically every raw file you ever shoot, unless you are a aficionado of vintage old lenses, then this is not going to be a problem for you. If you shoot JPEG, you got to shoot RAW to take advantage of this. Yeah, so there's that. Now, to know what RAW files are supported, because of course not every single camera and lens combo on the entire planet can possibly be supported. There are 60,000 combinations that are already there, but not everything. You go to dxo.com/supported-cameras. I think that's right, Lori. Could you please verify that for me and then drop the link into the chat or descript or wherever for me? But there is a web page on the DxO website where you can look up your camera model. So if you want to make sure that your camera and lenses are supported before you buy the software, you can totally do that. Since you asked about iPhones, I will tell you that iPhone RAW files are not currently supported. All right. That said, let's move on to the next part of this. All right. So where am I going to go next? We did Photoshop, we did Lightroom, bringing everything in. We did Lightroom, bringing individuals in. I showed you how to reveal in Finder. What if you're working with a cloud-based tool? Let's do that next. So whether you're working with Apple Photos or you're working with Lightroom CC, for the lack of a better term, it's just called Lightroom, but Lightroom CC, the same idea applies. When you're working with a cloud-based app, you do not necessarily have the raw file sitting on your computer somewhere. It's in the cloud, it's somewhere else. You don't know where it might be on your computer, you don't know where it is. So there is no reveal in Finder command. That option doesn't exist because reveal in, well, its source is somewhere in the cloud, so you can't. So to get to the original raw photo, you have to export it. And so this workflow, I'm going to show you two different workflows in here. I'm going to show you one in Apple Photos and I'm going to show you one in Lightroom CC. I'm going to call it Lightroom CC, even though it's just called Lightroom. It's just so you see the differences in here. So let's start with Apple Photos, and let's turn this off again. All right, Apple Photos. This is not my photo. This is one from the DxO demo batch. This is a raw file. We can see it says raw right there. Let's actually see what this is. It's an NEF file. Okay, this is a Nikon D7500 file. Cool, shot at 1600 ISO. Excellent. All right, so I've got this photo in Apple Photos, and I decide that I want to process this through PureRAW. I need to get to the original RAW, so I can go to File, Export, Unmodified Original for that photo. So that's one way of doing it, that's one way of doing it. If I was using Lightroom, same thing. I can right-click and I can choose Export One Photo, and there's going to be an original plus settings, or I can go to Export and choose Original. Either way, the whole point here is that you need to get to that original raw photo in there. Sorry, hiding screens and losing things on here. There we go. I need to get to that original raw photo. So in this case, from Apple Photos, I'm going to export this out. But if you're an Apple Photos user, I'm going to show you a really, really cool trick. So here's my raw image. If I just take this and I drag and drop it out to the desktop, it is going to export a JPEG file, which does me absolutely no good. But if I hold down the Option key and then drag this out, check this out, it exports the raw file. That's such a neat little trick. I learned this one a little while ago. So if you want to export the original raw file, Option drag that out of Apple Photos and you will get the raw file. So now let's go ahead back over to PureRAW. And once you've got that raw file, let's make this window a little bit smaller here. Once you've got that raw file, I can now take this and drag it in just like anyone. And there, of course, is our download options for the optics modules. Download this and we are ready to go. So let's take that photo, hit the process button and rip that through. So again, whether you're using Apple Photos or you're using Lightroom CC, you can export out that original photo and process it and then send it back. So I'm actually going to do this in both apps because I think it's interesting to see the differences in how they're handled. So this processing is done. I'm going to choose Export To. I'm going to choose Apple Photos. Incidentally, when you first install when you first install PureRAW, you're going to see these top four options in here: Lightroom, Lightroom Classic, Photoshop, and Elements. I don't have Photoshop Elements, so that's why it's not available to me. I have added Photos and Affinity Photo by simply going to select Custom Software and choosing it. In this case, what was I going to do? Oh yeah, Photos. Let's send this back to Apple Photos. I'm not going to send the original raw file because it's already there. Click on Export. Here's kind of a funky thing about Apple Photos. There is no import dialog. You get no import dialog. It just gets added to the database. So what I have to do is go to my imports, and there it is. So there's my import. I'm going to drag this into the same album where I started with, and now I've got my new DNG. Let's make sure. Yep, there's the Deep Prime DNG. So we see that there's the new one, and there's the old one here. Now this is a really interesting example. As I toggle back and forth between these, you can see the amount of lens correction difference that's been applied in here. which is quite good. Let's go in closer. There's no split view, unfortunately, in, I gotta hit the right command here. There we go. There's no split view in photos, so I can't do a side-by-side comparison. But if I do this, let's see here. So here's the original NEF. I want you to look at the windows. I want you to look at these lines over here on the right and see how these look here. And then I'll switch over to the new one. We're gonna have to zoom back in and look at the difference. I can't do a side-by-side, but you can see, if your memory of what you saw a few seconds ago is clear, this is a sharper image. This is just, you're seeing more detail in the edges in here than you were seeing before. So really quite a nice change in there, quite a nice advantage. So, and again, also the big thing here, and I think is really the point on this photo, is the amount of distortion correction that's happening in here between the two. So absolutely fantastic. So there's that. Okay, I promised to do this in Lightroom CC as well. So from Lightroom CC, same idea. Here's the photo. Now this photo, let me zoom in and look at this one up close before we do anything. So this is actually for a client, right? This is for Mevo, and we can see that the focus is obviously the camera here. The background's all out of focus. The background's all bokeh. When it comes to noise removal, the out of focus areas are the ones that tend to see the noise the most. That's where you're going to really see that really blatant noise pattern that you want to get rid of. This is not a high ISO photo, not terribly high. Let's see, I think it was 1600. Let's check. 8,000, so only 8,000, which is definitely not terribly high. This is shot on a Lumix S1R, which is a very high resolution. Was this almost a 50 megapixel file, I believe? So this is a big picture. If I zoom in to 100% on here, we can see the noise in the shadows in here. So it's 8,000 ISO, and even on the black here. Actually, this is really good. Let's look at it here. We'll see the noise on here and the noise back here. Now, if I go into the Lightroom adjustments, where are we, noise, you can see I've already done some noise reduction on here. If I bring that back down to 0, there's what it looked like originally. I had it up around 30. I could go higher, but as always, the higher you go, the more detail you're giving up. And so when I delivered these, I decided 30 was the happy medium in there. But now that I've got PureRAW at my disposal, well, maybe I want to hand off a cleaner file. So let's see what happens. Export one photo, export original plus settings. You can't do not the settings, so the settings are going to come. Send this to the desktop, export that, and wait for that, let that finish. Let's make this a little smaller so we can see what's going on over here. And we're going to see these pop up on the desktop here as soon. So it's downloading that. I had to download that file. Okay, so there we go. There's the XMP metadata. That XMP metadata has all the adjustments applied to it. I'm going to leave that there because this is going to get really quite interesting. So remember, I had already applied, where were we? I had already applied sharpening in the detail slider here. Okay, that's super important to remember that. All right, now I'm going to take this raw file and go to PureRAW and drop that baby in there. Get my download dialog. So it's a Panasonic S1R with the 24-105 lens. Download that. That's a big one, almost 10 megabytes. And hit save. For anyone who ever asked why don't all 60,000 profiles get downloaded automatically, that's why. Some of them are big. All right, so that's there. Click on process. We're going to leave it all at default. Hit process. The new raw photo is going to be dropped into that same DxO folder that was created automatically by the software. We'll let this tear through and let it do its thing. And in just a moment here, we are going to be able to see the results of this. See, I got a couple more questions coming up as well. That's awesome. I will jump to those as soon as I'm done with this. This is, okay, remember, this is a 50 megapixel file. That's why this one is taking so long to do, which is still not that long, but, but it is. Anyway, all right, let's just take this straight back. I'll export to, in this case, Lightroom. Not going to send the raw because the original raw, because it's already there. Click on export. This brings up the import dialog. Oh, I guess I had that selected accidentally, didn't mean to. So there is the one that I want to import. Notice because I was still in that album. So if we go back to, oh, sorry, there we go. If we go back to, oh, I can't, I'm already in Lightroom, sorry. I wanted to show that I was already in that Mevo Delivers, called Mevo Delivers, was the album I was in. Because I was there when the import dialog was triggered, it is already set to add to album. So I'm not going to have to do any manual rearranging the files like I did in Apple Photos. It's just going to show up in here. So I'll add that one photo. And let's go back to the grid view in here. Let's go to that view there. And oh, it's checking free space on disk. Okay, take your time honestly. There we go. And there's the new photo right next to it. Okay, so there's that one. Let's make sure we're looking at the right ones here. So the one on the left is the DNG. The one on the right is the raw photo. Okay, now I want to look at the adjustments. So we're looking at, let me go back to the original raw, open up these adjustments again, open this up. Let's open this and let's close this, make a little space in here. And again, I'm looking at the original raw. There's that noise reduction that I had applied to it. Now let me open this view and switch over to the DNG file. Look at how the noise reduction has automatically been removed. So part of this process, somewhere along the way, the noise reduction and the sharpening have both been removed for me. So I don't even have to do it. Going back to that original question of the person who had asked about removing those things, yes, you have to, but in this case, it's being done for me. So now let's take a look at this file up close, and we can see there's the DNG with no additional noise reduction applied, and there is the Adobe Lightroom file with additional noise reduction applied, and you can see clearly this is a noisier image than this one here. Now at this point, I actually never tried this before. What happens if I do add a little denoising? I could add a little on top of it. Yeah, the edges get pretty chunky pretty quickly. So if you need to, I mean, you'd have to be very, very careful, and I probably would recommend not doing that. But if you decided you needed to, you could add additional denoising on it, but I think that's probably not a good choice. Anyway, so that's that cool part of the process. The other adjustments, the color adjustments, are still applied. So if I go back over here, we're now looking at the raw. So my exposure and highlights adjustments have been applied. Did I do anything with the curves? I did not. So we're just looking at these highlights and exposure adjustment were already applied. Color, oh yeah, color, no color changes applied. Anyway, those were already applied to the original raw. I go back to the PureRAW file and we are seeing those, there we go, the exposure and the highlights are being done there. Just to drive further that point home about the color profiling, let me go back to this photo. This photo has, so this is the original raw, camera standard applied to it. This is the, what is this? Oh, this is the color profile that came out of the camera that was applied. Let's switch this over to Adobe Color so it matches what this one does, because this one is also going to get Adobe Color. But this is interesting, as part of a DNG, you actually get a little slider. You can increase or decrease the amount of that color profile applied to it. But again, this is the whole point here. The color profiling, the color science, if you will, is being allowed to be applied by the host software. It is not being applied by DxO. So I can choose, any of one of these existing ones that I want in here. So super, super cool on there. Right on. Okay, so I think that's all the workflows I wanted to show. Let me jump back over to the questions. There's a few more, and then we're going to wrap this thing up. Okay. All right, first question. I apply lens corrections by default on import in Lightroom Classic. I expect to use PureRAW for high ISO images. Any thoughts on how I need to adapt my workflow? So given what I just we saw here, you might not have to. Let's try it. You know what? Let's try it. That's why we do these things. That's why we do this work. Let's give it a try. I'm going to go over to Lightroom Classic. Where did Lightroom Classic go? Look, there it is. Okay. And let's take a different photo. I don't know, we'll just choose this one. Why not? Take that photo and get over to develop. And oh wait, this is probably not going to work because this, what was this shot on? Is this a Canon? This is a Canon file. Maybe this will work. Let's find out. I am in develop. I want to, where is, it's not tone curve. Is that under detail, sharpening, noise reduction, lens corrections. Here we go. All right, I'm going to apply, remove chromatic, enable profile corrections. Why hasn't it automatically selected it? Let me see what this photo is. I thought this was a Canon file. This is, where are we? There we go. Canon 5D Mark II and EF 100mm macro lens. I don't know why it didn't automatically detect that, but let's just do it manually. So that selected lens profile is Canon. Oh, now it's shit. Now I got it. EF 100 2.8. Okay, so there that is applied. And let's just to really make sure we see it, I'm going to take the distortion up and the vignetting down. Okay, so we know we've applied this with a color profile, lens profile manually added, and I've manually made changes to it. Okay, now let's take this photo and I'm going to drag this one into PureRAW. Download the profile for it. I guess I could turn off my camera while I do this. Downloaded, save, and there it is. Let's process that. Everything's set, hit process. This is an awesome question. Thank you. So I like these webinars. We can get into some of the hard stuff. This is great. And that's almost done. There, it's done. We're just going to send it straight back to Lightroom Classic without the original. Hit export and let that pop into place. And we've already got the album selected. Okay, so there's my two photos. Let's see here. That is the DNG. All right, let's open the DNG, go to the develop module, and they've been removed. Look at that. The profile has been removed. That is what I was hoping was going to happen, and in fact, it has. So to answer your question, sir, you don't have to change a thing. Or ma'am, you don't have to change a thing. It will automatically do it. I don't know where that's getting applied. I don't know if Lightroom is smart enough to know that something's been applied and so it's not applying it. I don't know if it just never applies those profiles. I don't know, but it's not applying it. So there you go. You are set. Awesome. Great. I'm glad you asked that. Next, in planning for low light images, would you expect better results capturing properly exposed at very high ISO, say 12,800, or underexposing one stop using a lower ISO than bringing up exposure after denoising through PureRAW? Okay, excellent question. Never underexpose and expect better results. If anything, overexpose. Expose to the right, ETTR. This is your standard kind of thought process towards getting the most out of your sensor is overexpose and pull down, never underexpose and lift up. So you absolutely would not want to do that. If anything, you'd shoot higher. So yeah, shoot, if you're shooting at a really high ISO, shoot at the ISO that is required to get a good proper exposure and then denoise. If this is a process you're going to do often, then by all means, take a couple of hours one evening, go somewhere dark where it's kind of those really low light situations, put the camera on a tripod so you have a very easily controlled situation and run some tests. Go normal correct exposure at whatever ISO it is. Go a higher ISO and overexpose the image. Go a lower ISO and underexpose the image. You're going to need to be in manual settings, right? Manual of shutter speed and aperture to do this. Control your ISO and compare them. By all means, you should compare them. And maybe you find in your camera you actually get better results going a different way. But the conventional wisdom is expose to the right, overexpose, and pull it down in post. Thank you. Great questions today. Can this subfolder in Lightroom for DxO DNGs also be done in Photolab 4? Yeah, because in Photolab, you choose where to export, and so you would choose to export to that subfolder. So yes, you could. And I'm using Bridge. Do you have a workflow using Bridge? So, oh gosh, I haven't used Bridge in forever. Let me think. So Bridge, you're browsing. Do I even have Bridge installed on this machine? I don't. I don't even have it installed on here. Worst case scenario, you would right click on the image in Bridge and reveal in Finder and then drag it in. That would be your worst case scenario. You might be able to drag and drop directly from Bridge in like I could from Lightroom Classic. Again, that's most likely to be a Mac option. Bridge, as I recall, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, because again, I've never used Bridge as part of my workflow. I've poked around in it a few times, but as I recall, Bridge is essentially a file browser that is then sending the image to ACR. Is that right? I don't have a good answer for you other than worst case scenario, right click, reveal in Finder and drag in. How would one apply noise reduction to no lens corrections? Oh, right, I was going to show you that and I forgot. Thank you. Okay, back into PureRAW. Okay, so let's say I'm going to use this photo as an example, even though it's not a high ISO photo, so you can't see there's no noise reduction to be done to it. But this photo here, if I wanted to process this without the lens profile, I would select the image, go to the DxO modules button up here, and then go down here. Oh, actually, I guess it doesn't even matter if it's selected. And I find that combination. So there's the 1DS Mark III with the 50mm fisheye, and I say do not apply correction. So none of the above. So the module is already downloaded, but it will not apply the correction, and now will only apply the denoising. This does unfortunately have to be done on a camera lens combination basis, not on a per image basis. I've asked for that feature, so we'll see what happens. But right now, you just have to turn off the profile for all photos that will be processed with that. Obviously, you can turn it on and off at will, but that's how you would do it. So if you had a high ISO image, you didn't want the lens profiling applied, just disable, choose none of the above, and then process it, and then you can always turn it back on again. How does your product compare to Topaz Denoise AI? Awesome question. Last webinar I did, I guess 2 weeks ago, I compared Deep Prime out of Photolab 4, which you now know is exactly the same denoising. I compared that to Topaz in addition to some other denoising. So I encourage you to go watch that webinar. Go to photojoseph.com/DxO, scroll down. It's going to be the top of the previous viewed webinars. In fact, let's just take a look at it now. And you will see it. So if you go to, let me just pull up my website here on another screen. Here we go. And all right, there's, whoa, my reminder's popping up. This is the page, and scroll down, scroll down, scroll down. And here we go. Noise reduction comparisons using DxO Deep Prime and other programs. That includes the Thingy AI, Topaz AI. Click on watch here, and it'll take you to my website, to a page on there where you can watch that. So there you go. And you see here I compared to Photoshop, Lightroom, Topaz, and Photolab 4, of course. So there you go. Excellent. Alrighty. That brings us to the end of our time together, folks. That was fabulous. I hope you enjoyed that. I did. That was fun. That was some good questions today. Thank you, guys. That was awesome. Really enjoyed that. Really enjoyed the tough questions. We got to try out some things, and I learned something along the way, too. So with all that said, take care of yourselves. I'll see you. When am I going to see you again? I'm going to see you. Let's go back a page. I'm going to see you on April 20th. There we go. April 20th is the next time I'll see you. Is that in a week? It's in a week. No, that's today. Sorry, April 27th, next week. See you next week. All right. Bye-bye.